You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Everybody, welcome back. This is the Warp Core Podcast. I am Urza Master. With me, as always, is my good buddy Lord Uther. Joining us today, Connell Cochran. Happy Halloween, the 3rd. I am super stoked to be talking Star Trek Picard Episode 5 of Season 3 today. Catching us up from last time, we went through Episodes 1 through 4. We've pretty much all universally agreed this is some of the finest television that's ever been delivered, let alone the finest Star Trek ever delivered. And we'll get to some of the background and go through the episode with Connell Cochran here in just a moment, but I'm going to put my opinion on the line first and foremost and say that I think we're continuing what we would call, quote-unquote, some of the best Star Trek that's ever been produced this week. And I'm putting that opinion out there to hang and turning it over to Connell Cochran for a little bit of background and walking us through what happened this week.
Thank you, Ursa Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks to you at home. So, Episode 5, Season 3 of Star Trek Picard is titled Imposters. And it's really hard to tell who's who. We have temporarily escaped the Vadic threat and the Shrike and the Nebula. And we've crawled back to Federation space. But Starfleet has been informed of Admiral Picard and Captain Riker's shenanigans, and they are sending out the USS Intrepid to figure out what's what. And we'll get into the Intrepid there and their tete-a-tete with the crew of the USS Titan. A little bit of background here. This episode was directed by Dan Liu, and he will also direct the next episode, The Bounty, which airs next week on your favorite Paramount streaming network. Was written, two writers, Cindy Apple and Chris Derrick. They both came on to the show in Season 2. Cindy Apple was responsible for writing or co-writing in Season 2 the 2 episodes that featured prominently at the NASA Gala when everybody was infiltrating to try to get to Renee Picard so that she would continue on the Europa mission. And we had a singing Girardi, and we had a car accident with Picard, and we had all sorts of hullabaloo. And then Chris Derrick was primarily responsible for the action-packed penultimate episode in which the Borg attempted to storm Chateau Picard, and there was a lot of green lasers and so forth. The episode ending with the Borg Queen and Girardi subsuming one another's consciousness and becoming an altogether new entity. So that's their background as far as it goes there. It's also the literal pivot point in the series, as we are now halfway through the 10-episode final season of Picard. So from this point forward, it's all downhill. And I don't mean quality. I just meant we've only got 5 more hours to go before it's all said and done. This episode boasted 2 guest stars you've probably seen on your television in the last few decades. The first, as the Vulcan crime lord Kryn, is Kirk Acevedo. And again, he's one of those guys that I know you've seen him, you just don't remember where. He was a regular on the HBO graphic prison series Oz. He also was on the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers. He was a regular on Fox's Fringe. He also has appeared on 4 different installments of the Law and Order franchise over the years, The Mothership and Criminal Intent and all of those. He made an appearance on The Walking Dead, right. And he met showrunner Terry Matalas. He was a regular on 12 Monkeys. So again, he's been quite around the block, has quite a few credits there. And then, of course, the big surprise, and the one that we'll kind of open the floor to immediately, is the return of Ro Laren, Ensign Ro, Michelle Forbes. Michelle Forbes has been acting since 1987 on Guiding Light, the soap opera. So she too has done her time as a working actress. She appeared on Homicide, Life on the Street, critically acclaimed series. She was a regular. She's been on 24, Battlestar Galactica's reboot 20 years ago. She was a patient on the Gabriel Byrne HBO series In Treatment. She's been in True Blood, The Killing, Big Sky, New Amsterdam, Berlin Station. But we all remember her for her appearances on Star Trek The Next Generation. Ensign Ro was introduced in an episode called Ensign Ro, and she was right there until the final season, season 7. And a little bit of backstory on Michelle Forbes and this character who takes a center stage in episode 5, Imposters. When we left this character, she was defecting from Starfleet, and as referenced in this episode, she pulled a phaser on Will Riker, and she defected to join the Maquis, which was a resistance group who was causing the Federation headaches as their opposition to the Cardassian, Bajoran civil conflict, and all of the storylines that were bubbling over in Star Trek Deep Space Nine and later Star Trek Voyager. Now the plan was, a couple of years prior, Ensign Ro had been on the show and had made an impression with the producers, and they were so taken with her that they wanted to spin her off, and they wanted to put her on their new show, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And in fact, early drafts and the series Bible had Ensign Ro in the role that would later be played by Nana Visitor. What was once Ro became Kira Nerys, the Bajoran command of DS9 with Captain Sisko. Forbes didn't want to be tied down. And, I mean, the producers, I don't know how much acrimony or what have you was on behind the scenes in terms of it, but they basically started off with, this is what we want to do, and she said, no, I don't want to do it. So they ended up recrafting DS9. But then they came back again about a season and a half later of Next Gen as it was winding down and said, well, we want to spin you off into Voyager, because one of the central tenets of Voyager's initial plotting was that it was the Maquis versus, the Starfleet regulars, et cetera, et cetera. So they wrote an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation in which she joined this splinter terrorist group, if you will, resistance group, and that was supposed to jump pad her into Voyager. And again, she turned him down. So it probably made for some awkward conversations in the hallways, but those were about 30 years ago. Michelle Forbes went on, again, did lots of work in TV, is still a wonderful actress and quite easy on the eyes. And so it was kind of a treat to see her welcome back into the franchise fold for this episode, kind of kept hush-hush under wraps, and trying to pay off some emotional beats that have actually been around, a good 30 years now, because this is the first sighting, I believe, on screen that we've had of her. And so there's all this unresolved conflict, really, between her and Admiral Picard, which we'll get into in a moment as far as how that plays out for Star Trek fans. Even if you're not a committed Star Trek viewer and don't know the intricacies of their relationship, it's played out in this episode very effectively that you can see Mentor feels betrayed by promising student / pupil that he was trying to bring to a higher level, and you can feel her betrayal as she feels that she was never going to live up to those expectations, and all of that is played out in some good dialogue and some very nice exchanges there between the two. The emotional core of this episode, though, kind of has to coexist with the who goes there, John Carpenter, The Thing, paranoia, as now that we know that changelings are virtually undetectable and will read as humans, thanks to some evolutionary changes in their biology. I mean, sure, they're still gooey, but now they can replicate organs, and they have, plasma-like blood, as Dr. Crusher discovers when they do an autopsy of a fallen changeling from episode 4. And so now, I mean, literally, they could be among us. They could be your neighbor. It's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's all of the Cold War paranoia of, do you trust your neighbor, your friend? How do you know the person sitting next to you is not diabolical and ready to phaser you in the back of the neck? And that atmosphere comes through very well, not just in the interactions between Picard and Ro, but throughout the crew members and so forth, searching for Jack Crusher and so forth. So the rest of this season, and in fact the entire season, but it's really going to hammer forward, it appears, the writers of, trust no one, because anybody could be sitting across the table from you. So I'll throw it over to the group's first sort of major discussion there, which is how you felt about, were you surprised? Had you already been spoiled by online accounts that Ro was coming back? How did you feel to see this storyline picked up 30 years later?
I loved it because I was not at all expecting it. Where we left Ro Laren, I was thinking, okay, she went to the Maquis Resistance, and then when the Maquis were destroyed, either by the Federation or the Cardassians or the First Dominion War, let's call it, there was, no indication that she would ever come back. And because I fully expected back in the day to see her on Voyager or DS9 at some point, and it never materialized the way I think any of us wanted it at the time. And I was content with that. A lot of characters kind of come and go off into the sunset. This, to me, captured a heart of Picard that I think you got flashes of in TNG, and it's an emotional Picard that I think this series has done beautifully. It has really shown his inner feelings in a way where on the series he was very reserved. I mean, in the movies you got some of it where, like, when Renee and his brother died in the fire, you got some of that, and you got him laying the pipe in Insurrection, and love of the ship and First Contact, and his father-son relationship with Data really strongly in Nemesis. But I don't think you ever really saw how he just, in general, felt about people who weren't immediate crew. The comers and the goers that had such deep connections, at least in the series, that like he hasn't brought up Vash in how long, and that was something like Ro. I mean, I was content as I am with Vash, who knows, may show up again. That to me was like, it was a very cool moment. And at first I was like, now how in the hell did she get here? And then they did an excellent job of explaining her past, but in a way that also kind of pitched this issue who she says she is. Because I fully was like, that's got to be a changeling. So that twist in the show was phenomenal. And the way she navigated that and then revealing that she's part of Starfleet intelligence, I mean, it was just the creme de la creme of writing. I mean, it really, this whole series has been incredible Star Trek writing. I mean, hats off to that writer's room, because one, this was a very unexpected cameo. Even with like all the people they touted as coming back this season, I would have never guessed Ro Laren. Like, of all the people I would want to see, Ro never came up on my list. Lore, certainly Moriarty. Those are two that I would love to see that we're going to eventually. But the other thing about this is the whole episode, aside from the Worf Rafi stuff that we see with Kryn, that's a pretty minor part of this episode. It's really that conflict with Starfleet being compromised that becomes central. And yet again, we're focusing deeply on that story and then bringing our Worf story into that at the end, which is, again, phenomenal. But what I find a little troubling is we're at episode 5, We've not seen Geordie LaForge. We know he's coming. We haven't seen Troy. We know she's coming, and we know the back half is Troy's story, so okay. We're just getting a taste of whatever's going on with Jack Crusher, which seems unbelievably centrally important. We have not seen Moriarty. We've not seen Lore, and it makes me wonder, are these characters getting less screen time than maybe they should? However, I think a lot of fans are probably feeling that. Like, you know, Lore is a big-ass character who could have a lot to do with what's going on. But let's take the flip side of this coin and look back at Season 2, or Season 1 for that matter. They did a lot of heavy lifting in a single episode in each of those seasons, where you were waiting for some big payoff, and it's like, this is like, you know, laying foundation episode. It's not even Monster of the Week quality. It's like they're building storylines in an episode where some of the episodes, like the ones at the NASA Space Center, felt a little bit less like a full episode and a little bit more like the exposition part of the movie. And you need that. You do need some break in the action. We still get good action here, which is, again, huge credit to the writers. But I feel like this is really laying that foundation that's going to take us. The whole time they've been teasing, this is something bigger, this is something bigger than that, now this is something even bigger than that. Here we are 5 episodes in, we're on our 5th level of this is bigger than us. And it's like, how big could this possibly be? I mean, you know, we're talking like Dominion War scale conflict, which makes sense, given that it's the Changelings. But we're also talking about a show that has 5 episodes left, you know. And that's where I'm getting excited as a fan, because I'm thinking, how do you tie up this whole story in 5 episodes and carry out a story with Lore and carry out a Moriarty episode and carry out a Troy Riker conclusion without something truly explosive? And I'm thinking, remember the end credits here, because it's directly mentioned that, you know, the whole plan for Frontier Day is to have the entire fleet present, the active fleet. The ships that aren't present, very notably, Voyager, Enterprise, all of the ones in storage are probably not compromised by the Changelings. So my guess is that they're going to realize at some point that all the transporters are compromised with whatever pathogen-based evolution of Changeling we're seeing, and they're going to realize we have to use these ships that have good transporters that are not compromised. They may be older, but we're going to have to probably do a little ship-to-ship conflict and some real moving around in the Enterprise E. And I'm forecasting that's going to happen, whether they're just running away to buy time and figure out what's going on, and that's why they run into Moriarty, that's why they run into Lore, who knows. But then we've also got, on the back end of all of this, we've got Worf giving one of the best theatrical death scenes I have ever seen, only to find out that that MFer was teasing us and came back to whoop wholesale ass on some badass, you know, gangsters. I have to say, it was very muted and very, like, you know, very Worf. I mean, it was the Worfest moment I think I've ever seen on Star Trek, where it's the perfect balance of, like, Klingon badassery and Klingon meditative forethought and planning, and it's just like, holy shit, that was awesome. Like, I mean, I really thought, okay, I guess this is where we say goodbye to Worf. This seems like a weird way to do it, but okay. And then 2 minutes later, I'm like, oh my god, that was so well done. They had me hook, line, and sinker that this is how they kill Worf. And I'm like, ah! So that is my wholehearted enthusiasm of what's going on in this episode.
Was not expecting Ro to show up, so that was I like that. I think you're right. It's a credit to the writers, and it just adds another level to the show in general. My prediction is we're going to get another season of something after this. That's with a mixture of crew. My other prediction is we're going to see Cisco, and now I'm wondering if it's going to be on the Defiant at some point. The Worf thing. Worf kind of went into a Yoda phase this episode, combined with Master Ninja that featured Lee Van Cleef on several MST3K episodes because he's like, oh, I went into a state of I was acting like I was dead. And I'm like, you're Lee Van Cleef from Master Ninja. I mean, come on. It was amazing. But that was pretty cool. I did like how he's like, oh, I'm bleeding severely. I need medical attention. I thought that was pretty good. We obviously get them now. We know that they're going to connect at the end with Picard. That's very obvious. So that's how they're going to get them together. I really question Rafi's whole involvement in season 3 in general. I feel like she's just thrown in there so you have a connection back to the other seasons. But I also feel like she's going to wind up falling in love with Worf. I think that's kind of inevitable. That's going to happen. He's training her, and she's going to fall in love.
She's not curious.
Whatever it takes. I agree. I do think Dr. Crusher is a changeling. I'll throw that out there too.
Wow.
Could be wrong. It's just a feeling because obviously that's her voice calling out to Jack. I'm all over the place right now. Whatever. Here's my question to the two of you. Captain Shaw, again. Whoever's playing him, what's this guy's name? There, Mr. Cochran.
Stashwick, I believe.
Todd's doing a great job, my friends. I mean, he's like, he's playing the
turbo lift scene is fantastic.
The amount of the animosity towards these two legends. That's what I love about this, because anyone else would be like, oh my gosh, Picard and Riker, the famous. He's like, I don't care who you are. Like you've effed this.
Sleep with the Baku villager. Wink, wink.
Like you're just screwing. Yeah, and he's like, you're basically screwing all this up. So here's my question. I'm thinking about this a lot. Do you think Shaw is more typical of commanders in Starfleet versus the Picards or the? I won't even throw Riker in there. The Picards, the Janeways, the Ciscos. Like, what's really more prominent in Starfleet? Do you think? Do you think it's people like this that are just trying to do their job on a daily basis and aren't always saving the galaxy? And we've always been, and this is going to sound weird, we've always been stuck with the captains are always saving everything, which I guess the captains that are always saving the galaxy are what interests us the most. But I feel like we're seeing a captain that's your everyday Joe, for a better term. Like, this is what captains go through. They don't kiss ass. They got to keep their ship together. They're running their ship. They're not in awe of these people. So I know I'm asking you to tell me what you think, and I just keep talking. So what are your thoughts? What's more typical, the Shaws or the Janeways and the Picards? I'll throw it back to you two.
I think another sci-fi franchise touched on this last year in terms of taking, let's say, this mythical organization, Starfleet or the Empire, and tried to show us, hey, these organizations with the flashy graphics and the cool sounding names, they're actually, a bunch of bureaucrats and mid-level managers, just the same as you would find at Google or, anywhere else. And I think, as you say, we've been given these heroic outliers, the James Kirks and the Jean-Luc Picards and so on and so forth. But I think, you're probably likely going to find more Shaws who are basically into covering their butt, following the rules. Maybe they get into HR trouble by flirting with an ensign, and there's something in their record. But I mean, and it's a nice contrast, right? Because I think Roddenberry's original vision was of this: we've moved past our petty differences and our impulses towards fascism and tyranny and all of that, and we're a better species. And I think it's a healthy reminder. I mean, it's actually, it's a better reminder than when we find out that one of them is a villainous changeling or a secret mole for the Romulans. It's a lot easier to believe that it's just, I've got a shitty boss and he happens to run the starship. There was an episode of a Netflix series a few years ago called Black Mirror. And they basically, Jesse Plemons won an Emmy or was nominated for an Emmy. They basically took their shots at Star Trek, specifically, and he was just he was a terrible captain. I mean, he was just awful. It was awful to his crew, and he was, and I think we kind of we're sort of putting a little pin in the balloon that the Starfleet is this noble organization, because it is. When you're faced with intergalactic genocide and so forth, you're expecting the virtuous and the honorable and the brave to rush forward and defend the galaxy and all of that. But again, I think it's a guy who has slights and carries around a list in his head of beefs and personal animosities. And I mean, it's a little bit of obviously sort of humor there. Like I say, that the scene in the turbo lift where he basically says, "Oh, who's the ones who crashed the Enterprise D into a planet? Who's the one that caused a time distortion?" Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, he's been waiting for the opportunity for years to be able to speak truth to power. And here it is. He gets to shove it in their faces. And Picard and Riker look a bit amused / like, yeah, we did those things. Like, that's that makes them all the more lovable. So yeah, I think there's a lot more of the I'm just doing my job. They told me to go to this quadrant. I'm going to go to this quadrant, and checking boxes rather than thinking outside the box and showing real courage and leadership, which is what we, the viewer, are going to hopefully extrapolate for ourselves anyways. What do you think, Ursa?
I totally agree. And I think that's the beauty of Shaw, in a sense. I think that where Shaw may seem like kind of a corporate guy who's just doing his job, I think he's got a streak of Kirk in him. He reminds me a lot of Kirk. He may not be laying the pipe like Kirk, but he's definitely got the inner badass that Kirk had. He's not ashamed to speak his mind to anybody. He's also not afraid of playing with fire. And I think that the beauty of his character and why so many people are thinking there could be a Shaw 7 spin-off series, that you kind of fall in love with those characters. You look at what they're doing and the way they're interacting with Picard and Riker. This is what I think a lot of people criticized about Star Trek for a really long time, is that there's so much convenience. They just do shit. It might be against the rules, but they never get in trouble. And when they are in trouble, all they have to do is like save the day and be like, well, I guess we'll let you off the hook. And there's a lot of yes men when it comes to, I'm Jean-Luc Picard. I need this, this, and this. And it harkens back to season 1, where they're like the absolute fucking hubris of Jean-Luc Picard. And, and I think, again, you're getting that sort of appropriate response to what we see as the viewer. And it's this cool playing with the fourth wall a little bit, where you're kind of getting like, there's got to be some regular shit that happens in Starfleet. Like, there's got to be everyday stuff. That's why I like Neelix as a character on Voyager, as just like this alien who comes on board and he's like, well, I can cook. And then he's a chef. And some of the episodes are about finding food. It's like, this is great stuff. I mean, that's where like the exploration stories tend to be some of the most interesting, because they're very much normal and like their everyday jobs. And that's where like Strange New Worlds does a really nice job, even though they've had some unique situations. But like, they're playing into that exploration bit that seems kind of mundane, but it's actually really exciting because you never know what you're going to find. Even if you find exactly what you expect, it's the relationships between the characters that change that make Star Trek compelling. So for me, for my dollars, I bet Starfleet is 90% people who just do their job. But the 10%, the Picards, the Kirks, the Rikers, the Shaws even, all those captains that end up being big names in history, they become big names as captains for what they do. But then I think you have legends like Captain Sulu, who, he was on the Enterprise and did a lot of cool shit, right? But then he was on the Excelsior. And aside from what happened in Star Trek VI, he's basically out doing surveys and sipping tea on his bridge, doing routine shit. And he loved it. So there's a lot of captains out there that are like, hey, you want me to go scan a nebula? I'll be back in 2 weeks. See ya, honey. And it works out. And those are still cool stories. Like, I love that they're doing this whole Shaw character, not only as a foil, but sort of as a viewer. He's like the casual observer. It's like if you ran into Elon Musk in an elevator on his way to being arrested. You would celebrate. I mean, I'd be rubbing shit in his face all day. And I'm not even taking a political stance. It's just fun to poke fun of people in power. It's called punching up, and comedians do it all the time, and I love it. The other side to this, though, is that I worry a bit about, like, having Rafi this season, because I do think it's kind of flimsy to include her. Aside from the fact it's kind of convenient, she sort of fits the build for Starfleet intelligence. Really, it's Worf's story that's being told. I like what he's doing as like her mentor, but it kind of concerns me. It's like they might put their eggs in the basket with Rafi, when really Worf is the character that's winning the scene. The Rafi scenes really aren't all that compelling until Worf shows up. I mean, they're good. They add something, but they're not like, I'm like, get back to Picard,
Well, I think they could have used her time.
Her function in this, the first season, it was addiction, right? I mean, she was strung out and kind of a mess, and Picard gave her a second chance. And then I don't remember if it was the first season or the second season. I think it was the second season. They were trapped back in time, so it must have been the first season. But she had that whole thing where she burned bridges with her kids, and she burned bridges with... I mean, they gave her character sort of an emotional place to stand on. Season 2 actually was her relationship with Seven. The dance of, commitment and things like that as we were forking along. But I think Uther has touched upon something. She doesn't have a reason in and of itself to be a part of the narrative yet. She is, again, the yin to Worf's yang once they've put those two together in episode 2.
Literally.
But there's nothing driving her character beyond the investigation of this weapons theft. And so, it's all plot driven, and there's nothing you can anchor.
They kind of flimsily tied it back to, like, she wants to help her kid and redevelop that and, ameliorate with her ex. But it was kind of throwaway,
Right.
Like, okay, that's why she's here.
We're not going to spend too much more time.
I'm sure she's going to get her payoff. At some point, it's going to be like, okay, you've done your duty. Now you can go fix your relationship with your kid, and there'll be a hug.
Give me a hug.
I'm guessing, or they'll kill her off. Maybe, I don't know. Hopefully not. I think she could be a good character for a future series, but again, I think it falls back to there's so much story to tell here that it concerns me for the next 5 episodes that we're going to see. Because there's a lot of wrapping up loose ends that they're going to try and pack in here. That's not to say they're going to tie up everything, because again, doors were left open. But what doors? How many?
Yeah, that was a theory. That was a theory I wanted to share with you two about that. As we got to 5, as we got to, again, the halfway point, I think a lot of what Ursa has been pitching us on this sort of reimagination, reinvention of mid-90s Trek, DS9 and Voyager, you can see them nibbling you can see the references to Dominion War. Obviously, the Changelings are a villain, but I think now the big picture is starting to become clearer. I think he's absolutely right that we're leaving doors open, and we're trying to get fan interest again in that realm. It's been, again, close to 30 years since we were seeing those storylines and those setups, in real time, weekly. So I feel like this is sort of a, hey, what do you guys think? You want some more Jem'Hadar in the future? Do you want the Dominion, the change? Like, I think we're going to get tastes all the way through, culminating in what hopes to be a fantastic payoff at the end. But I think in order to service the characters that you guys have already referenced or have not even made an appearance yet, that's what fans obviously are going to want to see. They're going to want to see Troy. They're going to want to see, this Brett Spiner as Lore. And I feel like the show in these last 5 episodes is going to, sort of resolve this and only give us glimpses of what could be if fan audience interest is there. And then, like you say, perhaps there's a series where we get more DS9, we get Alexander Siddig coming back as the Doctor, or we get, Nana Visitor as an older, grayer, I mean, I think those are probably doors that have not yet been closed, or at least they're starting to peer open. But I think we should scale back our expectation of what is possible. I mean, unless these next 5 episodes are 90-minute plus, just blow out the budget, extravaganza. It's a lot harder when you've only got 42 minutes, 45 minutes to move the story forward. And that, I think, was a missed opportunity with the Worf Raffi storyline here, because if you really want to sort of, poke a tribble at it, interviewing a crime boss on Metalis Prime for information that they need to advance the storyline, we did that with the Ferengi criminal Sneed. I mean, yes, this scene was cool. Yes, we had the Raffi versus Worf, fight to the death. Fight to the death! But we really didn't. I guess I was expecting after episode 3, when they kind of teamed up, we're going to team up and solve this. And then episode 4, that storyline was sidelined, as Uther pointed out. We stayed in the nebula with the Titan and the Shrike. I would have thought by this point in the narrative, maybe they've already gone to Daystrom or tried to get into Daystrom, or they've made some sort of progress. And it just felt like, for this week, despite the coolness that we got, that they were kind of being held in place, kind of like, guys, that they tried to steal something from Daystrom. Take that ship and get your butts out there. So, I mean, I don't see it as a flaw. I just see it as, when you have limited real estate with story architecture, you got to try to move these things along there. And, maybe now we're going to start seeing that rapid pickup, because we have no idea. The Titan has gone on the run after Ro Lauren's commander, Ro Lauren's self-sacrifice there. Again, the visual effects, just wind your heads back to 1987, syndicated television, and as cool as it was to see the Enterprise D, you knew you were looking at some animated special effect with the technology at the time. I mean, versus now, running a shuttle into a warp nacelle and knocking a ship of the line, off track. It's fantastic. I mean, like I say, the effects work for television, whatever they're willing to budget or whatever they can accomplish on those budgets now, are just, it makes you watch Star Trek V and cry. But we've beaten that horse there. And the other thing that I think we should bring up, the Jack Crusher in the room. I had never heard Lord Uther's theory on Beverly as a changeling. Provocative.
I just came up with it
provocative to be sure, because it might explain away why, if he is not altogether there. I mean, there's all sorts of suppositions. Is he a changeling himself? Right, obviously, or has he somehow come into contact with? I mean, I'll let you and Ursa kick out what you think of it. One thing's for sure is that we've got this Jason Bourne storyline again that we've already done in Picard Season 1 with Soji and her twin, which is, I never realized I was a lethal assassin that could take out 4 people with a phaser in my bare hands. And I mean, that's fine, but I hope that pays off in a way that it doesn't feel too familiar. And I think Uther's comment that maybe Beverly, down the road got replaced somehow, or, this isn't really his mother. Like, that would be that would be something to really, and that would also explain why she doesn't seem that, like, worked up that her kid has red glowing eyes, like, when he's emotionally on there. So, I mean,
Well, she
give
was
me your
saying,
thoughts on the Jack Crusher storyline.
Well, a couple things. First of all, they're all in. And the reason what I mean by they're all in, the special effects, I think that they're all in with the point of trying to get those people on board, like Urza said, to see if they can keep pushing this forward. That's one level, or one layer. The next layer is, if they are going to have another series, you're seeing the change in the series right now. And that's to your point, Urza. You've been kind of hammering that home the past few weeks. By the way, you should have been a plumber because you're just talking about pipe. But hello, you're welcome. But yeah, I think you're seeing Star Trek change, not completely, but I think you're going to see some of these typical components go away. But I think that change is good because look at what it's doing right now for the series. Crusher, I'm wondering if she's part of the collective's the wrong word. I'm wondering if she's part of whatever Cisco's a part of now somehow, and she's calling out to Jack. Yeah, I don't know if when Picard and her, wow, when they had their little thing, was she a changeling at the time? And they hid her away somewhere, and that this created, Jack Reacher Crusher. I don't know if that's what happened there too. Here's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see the next series revolve around him. I don't want that.
Right.
I could see it going in that direction if they're going to really try and cause a whole bunch of change. I don't want that. Just give me a crew on a What was that?
He's just a pretty face.
I have a pretty face?
Thank you. He's just, Jack Crusher's just a pretty face.
Oh, him.
Yeah,
right. Me too. But, yeah, I don't... I think he's going to pull a Wesley Crusher and go somewhere and kind of be gone. I think that would be the smart thing to do in the long run. Or maybe he goes and he leads the changelings. Take that. That just came to this bald noggin right now. Maybe he's going to wind up being the leader. Maybe he's going to turn all that around. Maybe you're going to see an alliance. Maybe he's going to wind up being a foil at some point. I mean, which goes back to Urza's point again, that the writing, and I think we've all alluded to this, the writing is that good that you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what I think is where you're seeing this change come in Star Trek-wise. It's not so predictable. What the Intrepid blows up, or the Nacella's blown up, I mean, we've heard the name Intrepid before, right? We haven't seen the Enterprise yet. You're right. We're probably going to see it on Frontier Day. That it kind of crossed my mind as well. But I'm obviously going to give Urza Master. But yeah, maybe we see Voyager. Maybe you see almost like a Battlestar Galactica type thing. Because that's where I feel like you were going with that, Urza. When you think about BSG, the reason why the Galactica was okay was because it wasn't wired in to the network like all the other new ships were. So you're right. Maybe that's how they pull all these things out of storage, and you wind up getting this fighting chance. And we still haven't seen. I think we're going to see Cisco. We still haven't seen him. So again, to your point, a lot of characters we haven't seen, and we only have 5 episodes to see that, which goes to the Halloween point of, is this just surface stuff that you can play with later in another series? You could have Lore come back. You could have B4 show up somewhere at some point. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that you could still see happen, which lends itself again to leaving the doors open. But that's how good the writing is. You're just not sure what's... And if any of those things happen, minus Jack Crusher being the center of a new series, and Rafi too, like, get rid of her. This... You could go in a bunch of different directions with Star Trek now and be very, very happy with it. And surprised and re-energized and enthused. All those things, I think, is what you're seeing now.
Yeah. I would totally agree that I think Beverly Crusher having some sort of flirtation with the Changeling Society, whether she's a changeling herself or had some interaction at some point, may have significant value to a storytelling moment here. I don't think she's a changeling. I don't think that's the narrative device they're going to go with. I do think that... I don't want to say this necessarily, but I think that her face is just not as expressive as maybe it once was. And whether that's intentional acting or just age playing out, and I swear I'm not trying to be ageist or anything like that.
Right.
You know, whether she's had any work done to her face, I don't know. I'm not accusing her of it. I'm just saying I have noticed that, you know, she doesn't have the expressions I would expect to see. Now, if that's intentional acting, she should win an Oscar, because that's incredible. And let me tell you this, if it is intentional, here's why it could be. It could turn out that she is a changeling from the Great Link, who is not part of this rebel segment that's trying to take over Starfleet. She might be trying to steal their asset and get it back to the Great Link, aka Jack Crusher. And the Great Link may be working in tandem with the real Beverly Crusher, who may be in the Gamma Quadrant. And that is a plot that I could see unfolding, because you think of Odo going back to change the whole Great Link. A splinter group does make sense. That's a huge upheaval of their whole society.
Yep.
And the Great Link, in its new benevolence, may be like, holy shit, we got to stop this before they think we did this, and they come back and they use their genetically engineered virus to kill us all. Because they've already tried that, and it was successful until somebody said, okay, we're not going to do that. Odo. And... you know, dollars to donuts, I still think Cisco becomes your key to avoiding certain doom. Sorry about the camera. Certain doom for the Federation. You know, because there's going to be a moment where they're going to need probably the wormhole. And who better to, you know, ferry you through than the emissary. So, that being said, it does open up a lot of potential doors. There's a lot of territory to cross between edge of Federation space and what may be formerly Deep Space Nine to get to the Gamma Quadrant. On top of that, you still have to somehow resolve this Daystrom story, which I think is probably where Lore is, and that's probably where we run into Geordi.
There you go.
More than likely, that makes sense. And it's possible that's also where we run into Moriarty. And I think that ultimately the Titan will probably head to Daystrom. They'll run into all these people, and then they will make their way to the wormhole, where they'll try and resolve whatever this story of this season of the series is. And then they'll probably make it back, or the survivors will make it back for Frontier Day. Yay.
Do you see...
I think it's brilliant. It's well composed.
Do you see Cisco coming back permanently? Or just doing a brief, just for this series?
I know Avery Brooks has said that he would absolutely come back if the story was right. Whether that's for this cameo in the series, or for a new movie, or a new spin-off series, I think remains to be seen. as far as I know, I don't think he's been up to much since Deep Space Nine. Not that I've seen, anyway. So, I mean, that would be something where, if it were me, 20 years later, they came to me and said, we want to do a Star Trek series that features Sisko as even a recurring character. I'm going to take Star Trek money for $600. Like, come on now, Trebek, get it going. Plus, I think Sisko's one of the best characters Star Trek ever produced. Season 1 I didn't like him in DS9 because I thought his voice was funny. But he really grows on you through the series, and he really made something out of nothing in that role. And I think that there is so much potential there as an actor, let alone just for Star Trek. As an actor, I think there's so much he could do with that hasn't been done before. So, and I know that's probably what he means by the right story. He wants to do something truly creative and truly unique. And what better time than now? I mean, I really do think Picard's success, even though we're only halfway through season 3, is going to speak for itself. And Paramount is going to be not married to, but probably very hard-pressed not to do a Star Trek series of some kind.
Yes.
My final thing on the Crusher storyline, again, where we've posited him as the MacGuffin. This is the key. This is what Vadic wants. This, he's got something that we will keep scraping away at till we get there. But for me, the character peaked emotionally with that devastating scene in 10 Forward in Episode 4. And I would have been perfectly okay if that character just existed as the frisky rogue who does, delivers medical supplies, but also can ship you weapons. Like, I would have been okay with keeping him at sort of a shallow characterization, because that scene, that one scene between him and that one interaction is volumes worth of characterization and emotional through line in the story. So I don't think anything we do with the Jason Bourne, the long kiss goodnight, I suddenly realized I'm a top-notch assassin, I'm a spy or whatever. I don't think any of that is going to have the same impact as I did when you finally realize, oh my gosh, that's his kid. And he's basically, trying to connect with his dad, and his dad's like, oh, Starfleet's the only family I've ever needed. That's, come on. Right. I mean, that's a knife right into however many hearts you have in Star Trek there. So I also want to talk briefly about Sneed the Ferengi and Kryn the Vulcan, because I think it's funny, the underworld that we've seen in this season in particular. When you think of Ferengis, particularly how they were first introduced on Next Gen, and then, with Quark and Rom and everybody in the bar and in Deep Space Nine, they were, they were nefarious, and they were greedy, and they were oftentimes sort of played lighter notes, with all the serious Cardassian. But I mean, I won't go so far as to say that they were pure comic relief, because they did influence storylines, and they actually did have depth and shadings. But they were certainly played at different notes throughout the 90s, those characters. And when Sneed came on for his one episode sort of cameo, what was fascinating was that he was a Tarantino-esque crime figure, who will resort to, hey, do some blow here so I know you're not undercover. And it was very much a different portrayal of a Ferengi, if you will. Like, he was just, this sort of cool character, risen to the top of whatever crime syndicate pyramid he currently was stationed at. And he played it with more menace and more. It was not just this bumbling, big-eared, oh, I'm so greedy and I like Latinum. And they did the same with Kirk Acevedo here as a Vulcan. That's kind of wrap your head around it for a second, a Vulcan crime lord who's still going to do terrible things, will cut off your fingertips if you cheat him in a deal or force you to fight to the death or do all these things, but just with a coolly logical veneer. Like he said, utopia requires crime, it's therefore logical to do bad things. Like, he's used his the very hard wiring of his culture and religion and species to justify any number of nefarious deeds that he's probably been behind. And to him, there's no, there's no cognitive dissonance there. I mean, it's logical. Again, I am a criminal. There is crime. Therefore, I should be doing it. So I like how they've approached the underworld here, giving us sort of a different interpretation of a Ferengi, not sort of the Quark, oh, geez, Cisco foxed me again. And then with the Vulcan being in that role, I mean, come on, besides Cybok and wherever, it's not that we usually see, green, cold-blooded Vulcans, I mean, they're usually impassive and on the side of the angels. So I thought that was interesting. I enjoyed giving us, a different taste of those characters.
Yeah, I loved it. I love that they brought in the Orion Syndicate and the underworld that you heard so much about on DS9 and all the way back to the original series. The last thing I want to touch on is the use of sound effects in this episode specifically, because you get that little dinging right away in the beginning from the original series. You get that bum, 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 bum from the movies, and I gotta say, like, that rang the nostalgia for me pretty hard. And it also, like, it so wonderfully brings more than just nostalgia. It brings a nuance to this season that the other two didn't have. Like, we knew they were gonna be nostalgic, no matter how we sliced it. But this one's not just, like, leaning into it. It's leaning hard into that paint without being, like, beating you over the head with nostalgia. And I think that's just really artfully done. And I think we'd be remiss without bringing it up, because the music in the series has been just phenomenal.
First rate.
So that's all I wanted to say on that. But as we transition here, it is time again to rate episode 5 on our scale of 7 warp cores. So this week we will start off with Lord Uther on episode 5, season 3, Star Trek Picard. How do you rate out of 7 warp cores? Jeez, I'll get this right eventually. How do you rate this episode?
I'm going to go 6, just because, again, Rafi just doesn't do it for me. And the Jack Crusher thing, I agree with, Cochrane's assessment there. I don't like the idea. I think they would have been fine just leaving him as a rogue and not a Jack Reacher type character. So unless there's some payoff that, again, which could happen because the series has done that so far, right? It's surprised us. So unless there's some kind of payoff, I think it's a misuse of the character. So as of now, 6 out of 7. Mr. Cochrane, I will throw it to you.
I'll match your 6 there. I'll call your bet.
Wonderful.
There. I think, overall, again, fantastic special effects. The use of the legacy soundtrack, even just in the end credits, it's just, we start off with First Contact, and then we segue into Jerry Goldsmith's triumphant Enterprise theme that was used for the Next Generation. Like, it makes it feel like it's part of a whole, right? And whereas, Picard seasons 1 and 2, they had good music by Jeff Russo. They had a nice title theme and so forth, and exotic credits, that would rival The Last of Us or Game of Thrones or what have you. But they also called attention to themselves as being, well, we're different. And this one just kind of says, no, we're part of Star Trek as far back as 1979. Jerry Gold, like it kind of wraps you up in that there. I think my main tribbles, like I say, I would have liked to have seen more noticeable advancement of the Raffi Worf storyline, which we've run out of runway. They're going to have to move forward in these next episodes, obviously. And this idea of Jack as sort of a Jason Bourne type character, I mean, like I say, there's not a binary choice, is he or isn't he? But for us to be invested when what we're really, let's be honest, what we really want to see are our classic crew on the same bridge, standing together, even if for just one moment, just like the end of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. You know, we want that this crew is back together as a family, and who knows what comes next, but this is how we're going to leave them, which is what Nemesis denied us, you know, based on what we've already talked about. So that's ultimately what fans, the series will sink or swim based on that moment. I know the creators and the writers know this. So the stuff with Jack Crusher at this point just feels, you know, ancillary to the real meat and potatoes we want to get to. But that doesn't give you any excuse to slough off. Give us some good, a good side dish there, and we'll be fine.
Definitely. I like how they're painting this season out. I think this episode did a nice job of continuing to lay foundational bricks. However, as with prior episodes and prior seasons, if we'd rated them individually, it felt a little bit incomplete. In that I didn't feel it advanced the story enough to be considered a full, true episode of a 10-episode series that's supposed to be like the big conclusion to Star Trek Picard. Now, I'm not saying it was bad either. I would rate this 6 out of 7 warp cores, but that would be why I would drop it from a perfect 7. In addition to the Rafi storyline, to me, feels a little weak right now, but I'm trusting the process that that's going to have some payoff. It seems like there might be. It may be just that she reconciles her family some. If that's the case, okay, you know, it was a little weak overall. The Jack Crusher story, very intrigued by it. I do think that's setting up a little bit more meat in the series than maybe we're anticipating right now. I also think that there's a high potential there that what it does set up may be those open doors that would allow a new Star Trek series to pick up the ashes or pick up the reins, depending on how that plays out. Now, what I don't want to see, and I think we'll probably all agree on this, is that they leave it so open that at the end, nothing resolves. And yeah, we may get the conclusion of the Next Gen crew story, but they haven't really quite completely figured out the Dominion storyline. And the last thing I want to see, Paramount be Paramount, and all that matters is the dollar, the last thing I want to see in my lifetime is a repeat of Street Fighter with Raul Julia that set up possibly the greatest cinematic sequel of all time. And unfortunately, we lost Raul Julia at the end. Rest in peace. But I don't want to see that again. I'd like to see some definite conclusion to whatever story they're crafting. If they leave doors open, I'd like to see it be more of the traditional Star Trek. The exploration, the weekly episodic stories with story arcs that develop over each season and conclude with your 2-parter to close out the season, or your 3-parter, or whatever. I am saying that because it's what Star Trek is best at. Now, I would also love to see this wrap up by episode 9, to see an episode 10 where you get to see what happens in the future. If this truly is the end of this crew, and we don't see the Next Gen crew after this, a wrap-up episode that kind of puts them out to pasture, they're riding off into the sunset Star Trek VI moment, totally fine with me. Even if it's just, hey, we got the Enterprise, let's take her for a spin before we bring her back to space dock. Love it. I love that idea if this is truly the end. But if they're coming back, even in a minor capacity, I would love to see them set up something, maybe not a season 4 of Picard, but maybe a spin-off series where all these characters can kind of come in and out as they please or as they're healthy to. So that's my final thoughts. You guys, any final thoughts?
Bring on
Wonderful.
Wednesday night.
We have gone. Whoa. We have gone boldly through episode 5 of Star Trek Picard. It was fantastic. We enjoyed every moment. We questioned some of the decisions, but at the end of the day, it's Star Trek.
Wonderful.
We'll catch you all next time on the Warp Core Podcast. I'm Urza Master, that is Lord Uther, and thank you again to Connell Cochran. Happy Halloween 3. Live long and prosper.